I realized I before had never really asked you just some basic background questions about channeling in your work, and I'm sure you've answered them many times before, but I think it'd be good to provide a little bit of context for listeners who are less familiar with you. So you have this new book, and you've been working in the format of channeling, and you work with I don't know if you call them entities or individuals or beings, the Z's. If you, tell us a little bit about like what that is for you, how long you've been doing this, and maybe just a little about who are the Z's to you.
Sure. Okay. So the Z's are a group, and the way that they describe themselves is they say we're a group of 88 beings, but they say we aren't fixed as an 88 because we can then extend wider into source and speak to other sources of information, other beings, other entities. And they say, just like we as humans are not fixed, like, Trevor, I think of this conversation right now is going to have an influence on me today. You and I first met a decade ago, and I loved your music. So your music had an influence on me. And, we're all constantly in this relay of information. And that was the first thing that they really explained to me that was different to what I'd heard or perceived with other channeling. I'd always thought, oh, when you channel, you have one guide or one angel or one being. And they were like, no, we're a group, but so are you. They said, all of you are made up of so much. So, anyway, to kind of back up
Mm.
the car, what am I? I'm 46. So I was 23, and I was on the London Underground subway train going to my job at the time, which was working for Greenpeace. But I was also at the time working to become a singer songwriter. I just recorded my first album. I was trying to break into the music industry, all that stuff. So I'm going through all this stuff in my head, self doubting stuff, oh, this isn't working stuff, all of that. And all of a sudden, from the left, I hear this very clear voice that I've never heard before saying, that's an interesting perspective, but you're wrong. And I'm just like, huh? And that begins a conversation that to this day has never gone away and is never not available to me. There is never a time that I can't turn my attention there and have a conversation with them, or sit down and write a question or write the date and receive a few sentences for them that I then write down. Obviously the first thing is you're like, oh, is this schizophrenia? Nowadays we refer to that as multiple personality disorder, but at the time that was the word. So I was like, oh, is this, have I crossed
Yeah.
over that line? But what was interesting to me was over a few days of talking to them and asking questions and getting the answers, I thought, well, God, this is useful if it is. Like it's really helpful. They help me understand things that I wasn't seeing the way they're seeing them. So perhaps an example, I was stuck in some ego perspective of, well, he's wrong, and how could he behave that way to me? And they're like, no, you're wrong, and here's why you're wrong, and here's what you're not seeing. And instead of being defensive against them the way that you could be if a friend kind of came at you with that information when you're in your early 20s, I wasn't defensive at all. It immediately like opened my body. Whatever stance I was in around the thought I was believing, my body would just start to relax, and I would hear what they were explaining to me, and I would go, oh, I hadn't even thought of it that way. And then the next time I had a conversation with that person, I would see it differently and experience it differently. So they were shifting my consciousness very quickly. I asked them, are you my guides? They had said, yes, we've been with you since you were a kid, but you stopped hearing us. I think they said either the age of 5 or 6. It's in one of the books. So often when we do these conversations for the books, I learn things that I've either never thought to ask, or they give me a bit more detail on my history with them, usually to illustrate a point in the book. And yeah, it was a very private journey for me for the first 4 or 5 months. I would go home from work every day, write questions about my life, about universal concepts, spiritual things. And the answers that would come back that I would write down would not only illuminate me in the moment, but I would go back and read them like in the days following and start to see parallels in my life. Um, People have often said, "Were you scared?" Not at all of them. They felt like home and they felt like truth. I was terrified of what people would think, and I didn't want to be the weirdo. And honestly, I wasn't like a fan of channeling. I had been taken to see a channeler once, and I was skeptical. I came away thinking, well, he's very intuitive and has some wisdom, but why did he have to close his eyes and put on a funny voice? Why couldn't he have just told me that? And I was someone who was into things like tarot readings, and I was going to personal development workshops. So I think because I was skeptical about what channeling was, it's made it a lot easier for me to understand, especially now I stand for it publicly and have done for 18 years. 18 years ago, I started doing readings for people. A friend pushed me into it, and the rest is history. And yeah, it helps me understand why, for people who have not had an experience like this or don't feel anything around it, or it's just not their path, I can understand why skepticism comes up for them. And of course, we're a society who have been taught to fear things that actually we shouldn't have been taught to fear,
Hmm.
things that are really a part of us. But over the years, whether it's government, religion, whatever force has decided to eradicate certain parts of just our natural truth, which is we are all intuitive. Um,
Hmm.
that's been an interesting journey for me. But just on a personal level, I think it has really helped erode one of my core issues, which was being worried about what other people think. And I was raised in a family where my parents were very worried about like what other people think of you and the neighbors. And so I think in a weird way, um, my trust of them and my trust of seeing what they have done for other people over the years has helped me rub up against that part of me that, now luckily I'm old enough to kind of go, people are going to think all kinds of things about you, and it's none of your business. And we're all so perspective based that you just don't want to waste any time on that.
Well, thanks for that background. I want to ask some more questions about, of course, the content, but let me get a little bit more of this context. Uh, so the Z's, did they ever say, like, do they speak to other people in the same way that they're communicating with you?
Well, it's interesting. They told me many, many years ago, they said, we are aligned with and attached to you. And because I asked, you hear of like many people channeling Saint Germain, or so I was expecting, possibly, didn't know what the answer would be. I will say that many people who listen to the Z's material or have read the book, we do hear, especially more these days, I think because it's more consumed, I guess. People will say, "Oh, I think I'm talking to the Z's," and so I'm always like, "Okay, it's not for me to get involved with that. That's not my path." But they have said that we're aligned with you, and that they have a contract with me, and that the contract is something I can break at any time. So actually, there have been 3 times I almost stopped channeling. The last time was about 5 years ago.
Do you feel that, like, have you had any reasoning for that? Like, you feel it's karmic, or you've had any past life information that you felt has informed what this contract is all about?
The thing that has come through and that feels true to me is I've had a lot of spiritual or religious lives in the past. I've literally had visceral experiences of being a monk, and various different paths around spirituality. So in this lifetime, part of my job, my purpose, is to broadcast a certain frequency. So I do that in a myriad of ways, and what I understand of that role for me, which is directly what I'm supposed to do, is it helps connect the frequency for other people who might want to use it for their life or broadcast it. So yeah, what they've